Happy to have on Michael Swain, fog.net, covers Kansas for the 24/7 sports site. And Michael, we got a big one. Illinois sells out this stadium for the first time since 2016. So we'll get your thoughts on what is a great Kansas program. But I want to start, and you did our great Q&A with us on the site, but I want to start with Lance Leipold because one of the underrated storylines is the weak search that Josh Whitman had. The names I kept hearing most were Brett Bielema and Lance Leipold. And at one point, I thought Lance Leipold was the likeliest guy to come to Illinois. And both have kind of infused, what were really bad Power 5 programs for a long time. Leipold, 18-21, but the last 2 years, back-to-back bowls. Doesn't happen very often at Kansas. And Bielema is 19-19 here in the Big Ten. But can you put into context for Illinois fans like what Leipold has accomplished in his 3 years so far at Kansas?
It really is doing, what some probably would have thought was the impossible. Look, I think probably 5 years ago, if you would have said that Kansas at Illinois in football is going to sell out, I think Jeremy, you and I both be like, yeah, okay, but what planet are we on? Because that's where the KU program, and I know Illinois has had their struggles, but that's where KU was at. Nobody would pay to go watch the Kansas program, right? They didn't win a game in 2015. They were terrible under David Beatty. Under Les Miles, they did better in high school recruiting, but still the program did not win a lot of games. And man, there's a lot of dysfunction when Les Miles was the head coach at Kansas. So all of a sudden, and you got to put this in context too, Jeremy, like Leipold took over in the spring of 2021. So we didn't even have a spring practice. So that first season is really like the first camp was like, okay, we got to figure out what this roster looks like. But then 2022 is the first time that the coaches had a full kind of off-season cycle, right? So the weightlifting, spring football, some of those summer kind of OTA style things that they allow college coaches to do now. And then KU goes 6-6 in the regular season, goes bowling for the first time in over a decade. And it's just incredible. And you think about the different things that have happened. College game day coming to Kansas. That's something I never would have thought would have happened. Big noon kickoff coming to Kansas for Kansas versus Oklahoma. KU winning that game. The turnaround of the program to now where Kansas is a ranked team in the preseason and continues to be ranked, right? Because they won their first game. But it's just so many things that if you would have told me this was the case, I would not have believed you. I would have thought you're crazy because for Kansas, this is so far removed from just 6 years ago when things were terrible. And it's a huge credit to Leipold, what his staff has done, and honestly, the players too, for the work they've put in, because it's a lot of the same players that were on that 2021 team that have just fought and got better every year. And now all of a sudden they have the chance to, compete at the highest level in the Big 12. So look, it's just a crazy journey. And it's kind of wild to think that this is where things are at in year 4 under Leipold, because I think people could have seen this happening maybe year 6, 7, when they've got a full cycle of recruiting classes and all of that stuff. But I don't know if anyone saw this coming in year 4.
It's one everywhere he's been. That's what I liked about him when Illinois was looking into him. All right, as I said, sold out crowd here in Memorial Stadium. So I think the Illini fans know how important this game is for Illinois. But what's this game at Illinois mean for Kansas?
Yeah, so I think this is a really good litmus test for Kansas, because I think every KU fan thinks this team can go and do the thing and win the Big 12. And there are still some question marks for KU, at least for me, as someone who maybe looks at things a little bit more, I wouldn't say cynically, but there's always things you can find to be better. And for KU, a weak side defensive end is a spot that Kansas lost Austin Booker at, right? The Illinois game last year was definitely Austin Booker's coming out party. But now they've got a guy, Dean Miller, who was about 215-ish this time last year, is now 235 playing the weak side defensive end spot. How can he hold his own there against a physical Illinois offensive line? For KU's front 7 overall, we've seen improvement year over year, but what does that look like now against an Illinois team that I think is better equipped offensively, maybe to pose some questions to KU with their offensive line, with someone like, Fagan in the backfield, the physicality he offers. So I think we're going to learn a lot about the KU defense in this game. And for KU offensively, it's just kind of a question of how does this offensive line do? Because there's some switching that went on during camp. Some of us probably didn't expect, where basically they flipped their tackles about a week into camp. That was not on the bingo card heading into camp. So that's a change. Obviously, Bryce Foster's a new center coming in from Texas A&M. So it's a new offensive line, and this just game because Illinois is so physical in the trenches, I think just will tell us so much about where KU's at in the trenches. I have no concerns about the defensive backfield, the quarterback, the running back, the wide receivers. It's a lot of the questions about, hey, how are you going to do in the trenches this season? And that's what allows you to be consistent week in and week out, right? And compete for conference titles, right? You got to be good in the trenches.
Yeah, it's a contrast of styles, that's for sure. Illinois is hoping their skill players are a little bit better, and Kansas hoping that their trenches are better than
Yeah.
people kind of give them credit for. All right, Andy Kotelnicki was a heck of an offensive coordinator. I just thought he really dominated Aaron Henry last year in this matchup, but Penn State plucked him away. So, what's that mean for this team that has a ton of offensive talent, obviously, to play with?
Yeah, it was really interesting to see how Leipold handled it. And we had heard that in the first team meeting when he hired Jeff Grimes, he let the players know, like, we are going to run the Kansas offense. And I think that messaging has been very clear this offseason. And watching Penn State, West Virginia this past weekend, I understand why the messaging has been so clear. Because if you listen to a broadcast talk about Andy Kotelnicki, it's, oh, he's the reason Kansas, the offense was so great. It's not that, hey, Matt Lubick was a great part of the offense behind the scenes, or Jim Zabrowski was Leipold's first offensive coordinator at Wisconsin Whitewater, and he is with the program still. There are all these different names in the background that help make the offense what it is today. And some of those names are still around. And so I think for KU, it's about continuing to do what they did last year. And then I think folding in some things that Jeff Grimes has done at previous stops. Look, Grimes has shown that he can step into a talented team and lead them to a Big 12 title. It's what he did at Baylor in 2021. He went from coaching Zach Wilson at BYU, takes over at Baylor, veteran, talented team, helps lead them to a Big 12 title. And I think that's what KU's hope is going to be this year. And it's interesting, the transition that had to happen. I think oftentimes, for example, reading some of the stuff about Kotelnicki going to Penn State, those Penn State players had to learn Kotelnicki's language for the offense. It's been the inverse with Jeff Grimes. He has had to learn Kansas's language for the offense and the way that Kansas practices and the way that Kansas does things. And he's been the one that has to adapt, not the players that have been kind of in the same scheme and system now for going on 4 years. So it creates this situation where, this Illinois game is going to tell us a lot about Jeff Grimes, because you can't read a lot into that Lindenwood game. And, if you go watch the press conference with Jeff Grimes, like, he stopped himself before saying, like, yeah, this is an advantage. The fact that I have all these weapons and nobody's seen how I'm going to use them. And you can have a broad idea, right? Jeff Grimes is very similar to what KU has done in the past, right? Wide zone, physical offense, wants to push the ball down the field and wants to be multiple. But there's still tweaks. And so jet motion's a new thing that's been added into the offense this year. Screen passes, not something KU did a lot of under Kotelnicki. Those are going to be new wrinkles added into this offense. So for KU, it's going to be a lot of the same plays, a lot of the same players and schemes. But I think there are just different tweaks that are going to happen that might make this offense look a little bit different. And I think that, for me, is what makes this game so interesting.
You mentioned how much the offensive line changes, but man, the skill players really don't. Jalen Daniels, he's back, and he showed last year against Illinois why he's a star. But he has dealt with those injury issues, and I found it interesting. He didn't run against Lindenwood; he didn't need to. But it'll be interesting to see how much he does against Illinois, because that stresses a defense so much. But what is his injury status? How has he kind of dealt with that? And just what makes him so special as the point guard of this offense?
Yeah, call him a point guard is a great way to put it, right? He's got a lot of really good players around him that he can distribute the ball to. So I think starting with the injury, last year was a back injury. He was able to play against Illinois. What was it, 3 weeks later against Texas? He basically tweaks it, and that ended his season. KU was really deliberate with the way they brought him back. Didn't do a ton during winter conditioning. Was a lot of focusing on like core strength, getting stronger. Not a lot of, hey, let's max out right now. Making sure that when spring football came, that okay, then you start to build that physical load. And you saw that happen where the first spring practice I went to, I was like smashing the panic button in my own head because Jalen was barely doing anything. And I'm thinking, oh my, we're in spring football and he's not doing much. But then you hear people talk about it and it makes more sense. The goal wasn't to have him ready for spring. It's ready to have him ready for the start of the season. And so they ramped him up through spring. During camp, they ramped him up during the first week. And basically the word around camp after the first week was that it was Jalen of old. And so there haven't been any setbacks. He's looked really good in practice. And obviously he looked like himself in the Lindenwood game. And I like what you mentioned there, Jeremy, about him not running much in the Lindenwood game, because this is something Jalen talked about either after Lindenwood or before Lindenwood, where college football has made Jalen Daniels a pocket passer.
Right.
He is not trying to be Lamar Jackson out there. And he knows himself that if he tries to be Lamar Jackson, there's a high likelihood that you could get hurt because you're going to take more hits. And so for him, he's definitely become more of this guy that is comfortable sitting in the pocket. If he needs to extend plays with his legs, he will. But I'm not sure how much of the read option stuff you're going to see like you did in 2022, when Jalen Daniels ran wild against Houston on the road. So for Jalen, like, this role of his has kind of transitioned over the years where he is more reliant on his arm talent, which is incredible. You watch some of the throws he makes, he has an NFL arm. It's really just a question of, can the guy stay healthy? And he's not also the biggest guy in the world, right? About 6 foot. So I think for him, it's just this year about, hey, can you stay healthy, be available? Because when he's available, Kansas wins football games. And so for him, I think in a game like this, it's going to be, can you extend the plays when you need them? If you got guys, coming off the edge, can you just extend plays for a minute, get the ball out, avoid taking a hit? That's going to be the key. And I think that's going to be the key for him all season.
All right, so this group of skill players, I mean, Lawrence Arnold, Luke Grimm, Quentin Skinner, all wide receiver, a lot of different flavors, wide out. But Devin Neal, to me, I'm just a huge fan of him. I think he's special. I think he might be the best running back Illinois plays all year, which is saying something because Illinois plays Oregon, they play Penn State. There's some good running backs in the Big Ten. But what makes this skill position group so good? Because it feels like there are several future pros here.
Yeah, I love the difference. Nobody is the same. And you could even include Daniel Highshaw in the running back room there, because if you want to look at the running backs room, right, Devin Neal is a guy that wants to make you miss. And he has good top end speed, maybe not elite top end speed, but he's really fast. But what he's really good at is finding one cut, go. And if he squares you up and it's a one-on-one matchup and you have to tackle him, he's really hard to tackle. And his improvement over the last couple of years has really been in his twitch, where if you watch him as a freshman, it's very much one cut, go, okay. You watch him last year, he's got the ability to juke guys out. He doesn't really do spin moves very often, but it's a lot of, are you able to juke him or use your change in direction to slow down for a second, then speed up? And so his feel for how to run with the football, I think, is really special. And then you've got someone like Daniel Highshaw next to him that is the exact opposite. There was a play last year against UCF where Highshaw had a clear lane to cut right, and he had a defensive back in front of him, and he just decided, I'm going to run this defensive back over. And that's who Daniel Highshaw is. He's a physical guy that wants to use his physicality to his advantage. So that tandem there creates a really nice dynamic, and both of those guys feed off of each other. At wide receiver, you've got kind of 3 different players where, if you watch the Lindenwood game, Luke Grimm really stood out. He's Cave's kind of slot receiver. He's really shifty, maybe one of the best route runners I've ever seen at Kansas, and he is Jalen's favorite target. If you look at Luke Grimm's games when Jalen Daniels healthy, he gets a lot of targets. When it's other quarterbacks, maybe not as much. So they've got a great connection. Then you look at someone like Lawrence Arnold, 6'3", about 210 pounds probably, a really big physical target, great guy to go throw 50-50 balls to. He's really improved as a route runner. You watched the Oklahoma game last year. He has a really savvy play where he's running a dig, and he basically decides just to sit down because he sees Jason, rolling out, and he finds him. So Lawrence has improved as a route runner, but he's a really physical target. And then there's Quentin Skinner, who I think you'll see do some end around stuff, jet sweep stuff. He's the fastest guy on KU's team. I know your fans love the miles per hour stuff I brought up last year, but he's a guy that, runs north of 23 miles an hour.
On board now. Their strength coach is telling me miles per hour all the time now. So we're getting used to it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Quentin is one of the fastest guys on the team, right? They do the GPS tracking stuff. One of the fastest guys on the team. He's a burner. He's a guy that 6'4" can just run and run and run. Maybe not going to make you miss, but he's someone that you get him in the open field, you're not catching him. And he's a guy that can blow the top off of a defense. So you put all these guys together, and there's just a great mix and match of what you need from an offense. So that's what I think makes this offense so great and so dynamic, is the fact that it's not a lot of one-trick ponies. It's a lot of different skill sets that then you can mesh together and create this offense that can stretch a defense in so many different ways.
You mentioned the questions on the offensive line, so it'll be interesting to see them go against Illinois' defensive front, which has some question marks. But let's focus on Kansas's defensive front. They lost Austin Booker, who Bears fans hope is really good. But, looking at, Phil Steele has like the linebackers and defensive line, some of the lowest in the Big 12. So how do you think they stack up on that, front? I guess we call it 6 or 7 now.
Yeah. So defensive tackle isn't sexy, right? And so I think a lot of people, when they look at a defensive line, you look at the defensive end first. And so if you want to rank KU's defensive ends towards the bottom, look, I'm not going to blame you. There's not a lot of experience at that weak side defensive end spot. On the strong side, there's Jeremy Robinson and Dylan Woodkey. Dylan Woodkey coming from Youngstown State, played a lot of football. You go watch the Ohio State game from Youngstown State, and Woodkey held his own, not around him, but he was pretty solid in that game. So on the strong side of the defense, right, you feel pretty good about those two at defensive end. It's the weak side spot where it's Dean Miller, a first-year starter, guy that really changed his body over the course of an offseason, but hasn't really done it. It's a true freshman in DJ Werner, who is KU's highest-rated signee ever. He's, just been on campus since June. He has impressed during camp, but he's also 6'3", about probably 225, 230. Still a little light from what you'd want to have. But he has to play because KU needs guys on that end to play. And they got by Job from Michigan State. He had an unfortunate hand injury in like the third practice at camp. So he's been playing with the club basically for the better part of a month now. He probably won't play as much because they don't like the fact that you can't grab and move and hold like that. So as a result, you're going to see basically Dean Miller, DJ Werner, and maybe Cole Petras, a walk-on for KU, who's a high-effort guy that's going to bring some intensity, but just maybe not a high-ceiling player. And so if you want to talk about that, I totally get it, right? That's a big weakness. We'll learn a lot about them this week. Defensive tackle is a spot where I feel really good about KU. They've got basically 3 guys that have played a lot of football, 3 guys, DJ Withers, Tommy Dunn, Caleb Taylor, who have played a lot. They're very experienced. Caleb may not be able to play this week because of an injury. But then behind them, they've got some like Keenan Caldwell's played a lot, Javier Derrick from North Dakota State played a lot, and Blake Harold. So it's a group that KU is going to rotate a lot, and they use that defensive tackle spot to slow the game down if there's a game when they feel like they might be outmatched just talent-wise or offensively, right? Oklahoma, Texas in the past have been when they've done that. So the defensive line, defensive end, interested to see how they look. Defensive tackle, I feel pretty good about. And so this is a game I think we're going to learn a lot about what this D-line is all about, just with the physicality Illinois is going to have and the way they try and attack KU.
All right, I think this is a great test for Luke Altmaier in this passing attack. Illinois is pretty bullish on what they can do in the passing game with a good group of receivers and Altmaier in his second year as a starter, but they're going to get tested by this Kansas secondary because ton of experience, Michael, and some guys who are going to play at the next level. So what makes this secondary at Kansas such a challenge?
It is the most ball hawking secondary I've ever seen. Like Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson between them have, I think, 5 pick sixes, almost a dozen interceptions in their career. Like they're guys that if you give them the chance to go and intercept the ball, they're going to take advantage of it. And you look at Melo Dotson getting another pick 6. He's got 3 in his career, the most that any KU player's ever had. And so those two at corner are lockdown types of guys. And basically last year, teams decided not to throw at Kobe, and they threw at Melo. And if you look at the PFF kind of target numbers, right, I think Melo had like for example, like 66 compared to Kobe's 33. And it's just an incredible difference of teams trying to go at Melo, and he took advantage last year. So it's a group that you can't give them a chance to make a play, because if you give them a chance, they'll make it. And then you look at safety. OJ Burrows is back. He's a multi-year starter, another one of those guys that's been around since 2021. He's really improved year over year. KU's doing something different defensively this year where they've kind of got a safety playing as a hybrid linebacker now, and that's going to be Marvin Grant from Purdue. He transferred a couple years ago, kind of more of a physical, 6'2", about 215, 220, hard hitter, really, really good athlete. So I think those are kind of the key guys to know. And I think for me, the one spot in the secondary you might be able to target is that boundary safety spot when Marvin Grant is playing kind of that hybrid role, because then it's Jalen Dye, who's in his first year really playing on defense as a contributor. So I'm really fascinated to see how Illinois tries to put Dye in some different spots, because I think that's maybe the one spot where you just don't know what KU has, where I think at the other ones, you know exactly what KU has, and it's not necessarily the type of players you want to really go and challenge a lot.
Yeah, that could be the slot position. So Zachary Franklin can line up there at times. I wonder if they get creative with how they line up some of their guys. All right. So what are the keys to the game, Michael, for Kansas to pull out a road win? Obviously, they're favored, but a sold out arena, prime time. It's going to be a rocking environment. They should have confidence based on what happened last year. But what are the keys to getting out of Illinois with a win?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, mentality. Night road games are tough, right? You're sitting around the hotel all day, you're watching other teams play, and you want to go and play. Can KU just be ready to play? I think that's something where we've seen earlier in Lance Leipold's tenure, maybe not so much late last season, but early last season in the past. KU's not always started well on the road. I think starting well on the road is going to be huge because this is the type of game where I feel like game state is going to be so important. If Illinois has to be on the front foot, look to throw the ball, that's a good spot for KU to be in. Whereas if KU has to try and come back and all of a sudden Illinois is able to get into the running game, get in the play action game with Altmaier, it's going to that's going to ask some serious questions of KU's defense. And I think the second key for KU is going to be how does that kind of weak side defensive end spot and really just the front set against the physicality of Illinois, because I think KU's more athletic this year at linebacker, but just because you're more athletic doesn't mean you're going to be just as good as tackling big physical players. So I want to see KU, tackle well. Can they hold their own physically? And then offensively, it's really just a question of, can KU avoid those big mistakes? You saw two of them against Lindenwood, a fumble on an end around, and a really bad interception from Jalen Daniels where there's a miscommunication. KU can't go into this game and give Illinois the ball 3 times, really even probably 2 times, because this is the type of contest where I think it is going to be tighter generally. And I think it's going to come down to who doesn't make the most mistakes. And I think for KU offensively, the way they can put their defense in a bind is with picks or fumbles. And this is a program that has had some issues with fumbles. I think KU put the ball on the ground twice against Illinois last year. It's just been an issue all over the course of Leipold's tenure. It's really the one thing that maybe hasn't even been corrected since his first year. So I think for KU, just take care of the football and just be physical on defense and see where things fall. Like, I think Illinois is better at some spots last year. I think they're better equipped maybe to pose some questions for KU this year. So I'm really fascinated to see how this game plays out, because I think we'll learn a lot about KU and if they're legit in terms of their Big 12 title hopes.
Yeah, big litmus test for both teams. Kansas with the expectation of, hey, can we compete for a Big 12 title? Illinois being, can we get this win to potentially get back to a bowl game? So it's going to be a fascinating one. Michael Swain, read his stuff, fog.net. He does a great job covering Kansas for 24/7 Sports. Michael, safe travels. I'll see you in Champaign this weekend, man.
Awesome. Sounds great, Jeremy. See you later.